Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance and accounting pros prepare for change and transformation. I'm your host, Tom Hood, the EVP for Business Engagement and Growth at the AICPA SEMA, the largest association of professional accountants, CPAs, and CGMAs in the world. Today, we're going to be talking about what CPAs and CGMAs and CFOs need to know about ESG. Joining me is Natan Zaidenweber, founder and CEO at Esg Trust. Say hello to everyone, Natan.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Tom. I'm delighted to be here with you today. Thank you.
It's awesome to have you. Let me introduce you to our audience, right? Natan has extensive experience in sustainability, leveraging skills in data architecture and technology to build ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance, stakeholder relationship management software applications. He also represents a broad and deep skill set with a solid record of success, directing teams of developers, product engineers, and design professionals with experience managing individuals in Australia, the UK, Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico. He has led engagements with energy biotech companies, NGOs, and other clients in collaboration with local community leaders. And he promotes the development of social and environmentally conscious business strategies, decisions, and programs. So again, welcome, Natan. This is where I'm honored to be doing this with you.
Thank
So
you.
I saw Natan at our ESG Startup Accelerator, and then again at our ESG Symposium a few weeks back in New York City. But let's start with this kind of the top trends that we're seeing in corporate finance is this ESG thing. And it looks like you've got a unique perspective and an application. So tell us a little bit about ESG Trust, Natan. What's it actually do?
Yes, Tom. So ESG Trust is a SaaS company, a software as a service company, and we combine multi-stakeholder analysis with ESG and trust analytics. And the goal is to be able to combine qualitative and quantitative data so that companies can have a more dynamic approach to managing their material issues and able to proactively identify what are the risks and opportunities that are linked with the ESG data that they handle. And we're built on the Salesforce platform, so we're able to leverage all the relationship management aspects of the platform, but we're designed specifically to handle ESG and trust data.
So tell us a little more about this multi-stakeholder analysis and trust. Obviously, both critical for this idea of value creation and reporting. But what do they need to know about this? What do CFOs need to know about what you're doing?
Well, so the challenge with building stakeholder trust is that you have multiple groups, different groups of stakeholders that may have different desires, different needs. And the challenge for CFOs is how do you balance the demands from different stakeholders so that when you're building trust with one stakeholder group, you're not decreasing the trust with the other.
Yeah.
So being able to get more visibility into data that can help CFOs understand what's the level of trust can be critical so that they can really focus and prioritize issues as they come along without alienating or basically decreasing trust in other groups that may not be involved in that decision.
Now, can you give us just a couple of like tangible examples for our audience, like so they understand like what would examples of a couple multi-stakeholders be, and like what are the kind of things that you would be doing with them? Give us like a scenario that you've done before or that could help them get deeper into these concepts.
So, the idea to not just focus on the shareholder and focus on stakeholders is something that's been gaining traction, I would say, organizations like the World Economic Forum, who are pushing this concept of stakeholder capitalism, the Business Roundtable, who is encouraging companies to focus on stakeholders. And the general groups that you would have are, of course, investors, shareholders, employees, customers, um, suppliers, but also, for example, communities where the company operates, and in some cases, society at large. Companies are being forced to address societal issues that perhaps in the past were not considered part of their own purview, but now, given the pressures and the way consumers and investors are requiring companies to respond, it's really changing the game.
Mhm.
So, what I notice when working with our customers is that if a company has a proactive approach to managing stakeholders and is doing so in a way that is ongoing, they're able to receive information that can help them make decisions, financial decisions, with more clarity and avoid setbacks. So, to give you an example, working with a very large oil and gas company operating in a very sensitive environment in the Amazon, this company had to build hovercrafts to be able to transport some of their materials through the Amazon River. Each hovercraft or the whole infrastructure would cost about $5 million to do, and they were designing these hovercrafts in Louisiana. However, because they had a very strong community engagement process in place, they were able to go with the design to the communities and show them, look, this is what we're planning to do. And immediately there was a backlash because the communities felt that the design was offensive to their own spiritual and cosmology uh, understanding of the world. Having that information, the company decided to change the design to accommodate the community's concerns. So instead of paying $5 million, bringing these hovercrafts all the way to the Amazon and have literally people throwing arrows at these hovercrafts, they were able to engage the community, have them take ownership of the process, and that enabled the company to obtain a social license to operate and silence their critics about whether or not they are addressing environmental and social impacts. So this is a clear example. It's a interesting example because of where it took place. But I think that you can extrapolate that kind of decision analysis to any company in any kind of scenario, and you will always find that having that stakeholder input can certainly help companies make better decisions.
Yeah, yeah.
Having this multi-stakeholder approach, it broadens the lens and it gives companies the ability to understand social and environmental externalities at a different level than it's just if you're just acting on pure anecdotal or gut feeling, if you will.
Natan, you're reminding me of my prior life. I was a CFO in a highway construction company, and we were putting a asphalt plant in a heavy industrial area. And the community ultimately rose up to try to fight us, even though we were zoned properly, everything was right. But that stakeholder group, if you will, of course, as CFO, I kind of got it because nobody else wanted it. So I had to learn the hard way. They already held up our permits. So if I had had this tool way back then, that might have been a way to kind of get ahead of that a bit and find out where that opposition would come from.
Absolutely. And look, the tool is as it is just a tool. I think what's important is for companies to make their stakeholders feel that they're being listened to and that their input is being taken into account, because
Yeah.
that goes a long way in avoiding the kind of situations that you just described.
Perfect. All right, now we're gonna jump into some more things that I don't really know much about, but that's why you're here. Tell us about these things.
I'm
So
happy to do
talk,
so.
talk about this gap that exists between the double materiality concept in Europe and the direction that the SEC and the industry is taking towards a more narrow view of materiality.
Yes, so this is actually a big debate that's, I think, taking place all over the world right now, especially because, I mean, Europe has taken a clear stance. They've come up with some strong regulation that will literally force companies to report on their sustainability activities. And in some countries, like, for example, the UK, you already have regulation for utility companies that are requiring them to engage stakeholders and report on the information from that engagement. Mm-hmm. So the concept of double materiality is not just looking at what is the impact, that the world has on the company, for example, climate change, and what are the risks associated with climate change, but it also looks at the impacts that the company has on the world or their stakeholders. So that's why it's called double materiality, because you're not just addressing what's material for the company, but you're trying to understand and address what's material for your stakeholders. In the US, I think there's a lot of interest in the movements by the SEC, particularly around disclosures on climate change and climate risks. However, the concept of materiality, it's narrowly focused just on the impacts on the company. So the company needs to provide information to the SEC in their 10K and other instruments about, what is it doing to address risks of climate change, how are they mitigating those risks, and things of that nature. Now, the interesting thing is that obviously you have companies that operate in the US and Europe. So how are they going to, merge those two visions of materiality? And I think that that's pretty much a question mark at the moment. I don't think there's a clear answer. My understanding is that there's definitely communication between, Europe and the US, and the SEC obviously understands what Europe is doing. So hopefully in the future, we'll see more alignment and more guidance, particularly for global companies. How do you basically address these different needs and ultimately, do so in a way that's aligned with regulation and investor interest?
Gotcha. Now, I'm going to guess that your application helps deal with this idea a bit so like, what's the value of having this, I guess it's dynamic materiality approach to more systematically and in real time manage these material issues and help build organizational resilience, right, in these times of high uncertainty? How does that all work?
So, Tom, let me take you back, 3 years from today. 2019, the pandemic was nowhere in anyone's radar. Just think of how the world was there. What were the issues that were of most concern to us? In many ways, that has changed dramatically. So if companies, the last time they did a materiality assessment was 2019, you can't really deal in 2022 with the issues that you were concerned with in 2019. And that's why it's so important, I believe, to have a more sort of a feedback loop mechanism, where as issues change, it's not that all of a sudden climate change is not going to be material, for example, but the question is, how are CFOs prioritizing these issues? How are they prioritizing engagement, investment, for example? And if they're not looking at the feedback loop, if they're not seeing what is the impact of what they're doing today and how that may change tomorrow when something dramatically happens that shifts stakeholders' expectations, then the company is pretty much navigating blindly, I believe, because they're, making decisions with information from 2 or 3 years ago. And that clearly doesn't work in our world today, where things are moving so dramatically fast. So this idea of dynamic materiality is nothing else but let's keep proactively engaging stakeholders, gathering and organizing this information so that ultimately we can make better decisions that are more in tune with the times, rather than, with some fixated idea of where issues should be.
That's a great example, Natan. That's perfect. And so ESG Trust, the way you're working, and I guess I can probably see or guess those connections, i.e. Salesforce, where you're trying to get real-time data or make sure you're updating regularly. So so ESG Trust helps track and manage that and then get stakeholder feedback, I guess, right? And track that. Tell us a little bit about that piece.
Absolutely. So, Tom, the average company that we talk to is using at least 10 different systems to gather their ESG data, whether it's SAP or HR or health, safety, and environment. It's incredibly difficult just to gather this information and put it in one single place. So ESG Trust kind of sits on top of all those systems and pulls data so that you get a bird's eye view of your organization. With that data, including how the company engages stakeholders and collects data on those interactions, by putting those two pieces together, you're able to correlate information. Part of the challenge, as I mentioned earlier, with stakeholder data is that it's mainly qualitative. So by definition, you can't really just put quantities and figure out, in a tangible way what you're talking about. However, qualitative data can be mapped, can be correlated, and ultimately can be organized so that you can put some metrics around it. For example, how intensive is the stakeholder interaction with this particular group as opposed to this other group? That's kind of information that companies, they're doing it today. They're just not capturing the data. And our argument is that by capturing this data and by correlating it in a systematic way, you can start getting a better picture of what your stakeholders think, what the impact of your actions are, and ultimately how aligned your organization is with the external world.
Yeah, and it's funny because in our Future Finance Leadership Advisory Group, they made it clear that they wanted to go from just capturing data, the compliance aspect of ESG, and they really wanted to move a lot further into value creation.
Absolutely.
And what you're describing with multi-stakeholder analysis and basically a more dynamic materiality process, you're actually in that position to really create value on an ongoing basis and making sure you're keeping all your stakeholders and obviously trust in your business really, really high, which in these days is essential.
Absolutely. I mean, I could name, off the top of my head, some of the two main value creation activities. One of them is literally lowering the cost of capital. Mm-hmm. Investors want to know how you're managing your ESG, what are your risks. So by having a high ESG score, your cost of capital is going down. Yeah. Secondly, employee retainment. That's a huge problem these days, as we all know. And, it's hard for companies to hire talent. The new generation is keenly aware of the issues that we're talking about, and they don't want to work for companies that are not addressing proactively and consciously those issues. Yeah. So the ability to retain employees, to lower the cost of capital, and ultimately to obtain a license to operate are value creation activities that I believe the CFO is poised in an excellent position to take advantage of those possibilities and drive their organization, elevate the office of the CFO so that it moves from, like you said, just compliance and reporting to something that's much more value driven. Yeah. And ultimately, as I think CFOs are the ultimate custodians of trust in the organization. So it only makes sense for them to own this process. And I'll just say one last thing, because I think, being part of the association, one of the things that we've learned is that a lot of people are expecting an analogy from what happened with Sarbanes-Oxley to happen with ESG. So clearly, the office of the CFO is the place where all of these controls and information will ultimately lay. I mean, that's what experts are saying.
Yeah, that's clearly what our group thought. And, yes, investor relations and some other groups will be part of it, but clearly the CFO will be driving it, especially as you get closer to both the value creation side and being able to let auditors attest, because someone's going to have to attest on this, we know. So that's the other thing that's in the works going from that standpoint. Natan, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us. So I learned a lot today about multi-stakeholder analysis and this idea of dynamic materiality. I didn't know about either one of those concepts. You did a great job explaining those, by the way. You can follow him on Twitter. I'm going to spell it for you because you won't be able to spell it from the word. So at Nzaidenweber. That's the Twitter handle. We'll put that in the chat, and then visit him on the web at http://esgtrust.io. So esgtrust.io is the website to get more about Natan and ESG Trust. You can also probably connect to him on LinkedIn. Natan, thank you so much for being here. Say bye to our group, and I'll do the final closing.
Tom, this has been a really wonderful experience. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to talk to you and to your audience. And until next time, thank you.
It's awesome having you. So I want to thank all of you for joining us live. Don't miss our other Future Ready Live sessions back on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of each month at noon Eastern. See you then. Thank you.
Thank you.